Hello, everybody who's watching this. My name is Earl, and I'm creating this video, which is going to be an introduction to this channel. Excuse me. The channel is known as Ten-acious Strat, and the reason for that I will lay out here in the next couple of minutes. If you see Strat, you might think guitars, which I do like. I do play the guitar, and but it's not Stratocaster. There's also, I guess, Stratosphere, and it's not that. There's a game that I've been playing now for a little while called Strat-o-matic, and it's a company that makes games. Originally was only making games that involved using cards and dice to simulate sports. They also do computerized versions now. I haven't tried their computerized version yet, but what I have done is played with the cards and dice version. And so I guess a little bit of an introduction as to why. When I was a kid, I was definitely into baseball. I'm into many sports, but played baseball. And one of the things that I ended up playing when I was a kid was this, it's kind of a board/card and dice game called Charlie Brown's All-Stars. And I used to have a lot of fun with that. I made up teams with my friends from school and stuff like that, and you basically rolled, and you didn't need real players. You could just make up people. You could make up Joe Schmo as one of the players or whatever. It's just, but that's how it it would be sort of a random roll the dice. You'd end up moving first or second or home run or whatever. So, and that's how it played out. So you get older, things lose their novelty, or you have other things. Video games started becoming big, and so most of our time was spent doing that, my time. And so a couple of months ago, I was posting some pictures of some pages that I wrote out scoring a baseball game or two, and a friend posted something. Why don't you try Strat-o-matic? If you like statistics and that kind of thing, you might like Strat-o-matic. And I'm like, I've heard the name, I didn't know much about it, so I looked into it, kind of did some research, and realized that it was an awful lot like the game that I played when I was a kid, although much more elaborate, which to me is fine. I'm the type of guy that likes to kind of go all in on things that I consider to be hobbies. And so I went ahead and bought the game. I got out a couple teams that were just almost randomly picked by me. It was Arizona and Detroit. I'm a fan of neither. And I played a game, and I think it was 7-5, or maybe I think it was 7-3 actually, now that I'm thinking about it. I think Detroit won over Arizona. So I thought, well, maybe I'll try another one with the same teams, just change the pitchers. And so I did, and I think it ended up being the exact same score. I'm like, that's weird. So I asked my friend, and he's like, that's really weird, and that doesn't usually happen for me at all. So I'm like, okay, maybe I'll throw a couple more. So then I threw a couple more games at it, and I don't know. It ended up being, I've played so many games by now, and what's going on at this point has sort of like made me forget about what I did early on. I probably still have the sheets around here somewhere that I kept score on, but and I played that in the most basic of the modes that they have for this game, which is called basic. By now I've actually moved up to what's called advanced, which takes more things into account. So this is what Strat is. That's a 5-minute explanation of Strat. Basically, baseball. They have games. They have other games that for other sports, but this channel, at least for the moment, is going to be about baseball. And now the tenacious part is it's basically just a word that had the number or the word 10 at the front of it. Because what I decided was that, well, let's go into it here. I started looking after having this sort of 4 or 5 game goofing around period, where I started looking online to see what my options would be for using this. I mean, it's all the teams from 2015, 27 players for each. What am I going to do? And so I started looking, and most people did one of a couple things. They either would go into leagues against other human managers who would play the game, and they would often draft the teams based on almost like a fantasy draft, as you might do, you know, and I think there are tons of those around. Some are keepers, some are not. To me, I'd like to do that sometime, but it might seem a little intimidating jumping right into something like that without having played the game a whole lot. I've had this game for 6 weeks now, we'll say. I forget which week exactly I got it, but maybe 2 months. So you either have that group, or you have the group that I'm in that are more of solo players, which this game actually works out pretty well if you want to play solo. I've done this quite a bit. You manage both teams, and it's awesome. But what do they do? They usually will do, there's a couple ways you could do it. You could have a tournament. Single elimination, double elimination, whatever. You just pick, you maybe pick all the teams, you pick a couple of the teams, whatever you want to do. You could simulate some kind of a tournament. Some people like to go into a full-blown 100% replay of a season, either as one team or as every team, and it could take them years to actually do it. And, you know, I started thinking about, like, being a newbie, relatively speaking, do I really want to do that? Not really. I didn't do the calculation for the number of games that would compute to, but it's more than, I mean, you've got 162 games plus. I mean, and that's for if you were doing a current set of cards. You could go back in time and maybe find a season that's a little shorter and has fewer teams. I think what those players mostly like is to go back into history and replay a full season, and you get to really see how a variety of players actually, quote-unquote, behaved in a baseball setting, how they play out, who's good for stealing a bunch of bases, who's good for, you know, quality start, you know, whatever. I mean, you can go back and just get an idea of players that you never would have known about besides this, because it's not like there's much film footage from back in the 20s or teens or whatever. And so anyway, so that's the other thing. That's the other way to do it. And so I guess what I thought was that the expenditure of time would be too much for someone who was new. But I also like the aspects of a season. And so my thought was, I started brainstorming, and I thought, okay, maybe what I can do is take a segment of the teams. You know, there's 30. So why don't we go with 10? And I started thinking about it some more, and 10 seemed like a good idea. It's a third of the teams. And so at that point, I said, which 10 teams? Some people might take the best 10. Some people might take the ones that include their favorite team, the ones that are closest to them, a couple divisions. I mean, there's ways to do it. My idea was I like randomization. I like sort of letting, you know, I mean, heck, the game itself is, you know, you roll dice, so there's a lot of randomization to that already. So I guess I thought that randomizing the list of Major League Baseball teams would be the way that I would want to set up. So that's what I did. I went to, I think it's random.org or something like that, and they have ways that you can, it'll give you random numbers, it'll randomize a list, there's a number of different things it'll do. So I manually inputted all of the team names, and I hit go, and it like spit out the list randomized. And so I took the top 10 teams out of that list, and that's the teams that are going to be in the Ten-acious Baseball League. So we'll go over those in just a minute. The season itself, that will comprise of, I like baseball in that it has series, usually 3 games in a series. That's the normal length that teams do series. I mean, you might have 2 and 4 games here and there, but it all averages out into 3. So I thought the best way to do this, to try and keep the games not too burdensome, but also enough to be a real project, would be a home and away series against each opponent. So you got 10 teams, and then you have so you have 3 games at home and 3 games away against each opponent. That adds up to 54 games total for every team. You do the multiplication or whatever, and it gets you somewhere in the 270s, I think, for total games played for the regular season, which is a pretty considerable time investment. But the thing that I like, I think the thing that draws most people to baseball from the standpoint of statistics is the sample size is so great. In the NFL, you could have a team go on a 6 or 7 game losing streak and their season's done. In baseball, you can have a 6 or 7 game losing. Heck, the San Francisco Giants just recently had a 6 game losing streak coming out of the All-Star break, and I think they're still set up well for the rest of the season. So there's that kind of sample size, and there's also the sample size of players and their statistics. They're going to repeat when they're in their prime for the most part. That, given a large enough sample size, that the mean is going to be reached one way or the other. Whether you are off to a hot start and come through and then get cold at the end, or vice versa, or you're just consistent, or you have a bunch of valleys and hills and all this good stuff. It should play out about the same. And I think that's what this game, Strat-o-matic, is designed to do, is to simulate over the long haul. That's what it claims, and I guess that's what I'm hoping to do through this, is to so by having this kind of a season, 54 games, you have enough of a length that it should be pretty indicative for most players. You might have a couple players who end up going off and going way above what their average was supposed to be, or be way out of line for their earned run average or something like that. But it also could mean that you could have some interesting results in the standings. So anyway, I think that's why I'm doing it. The other nice thing about this is that it lines up so you can really do a 5-man rotation for starting pitchers. You can also do a good bit of roster rotation, as far as making sure you play your backup catcher every other day, or every third day, or squirt in some utility infielders that almost always get a game a week, or a game every other week, or something like that, when you can afford it, to try to keep the best players fresh. And so my plan is to try and honor, for the most part, the at-bats and innings pitched guidelines on the card, because I think that's what you should try to do, put out the best team, but not necessarily the best team from the standpoint of if you have a player that only played a small amount of the season. Okay, so we get through the regular season. What are we going to do with that? the soccer leagues would just say that whoever has the best record at that point would win. We're going to do a playoff because this is America and we like playoffs. And so I'm going to take the top 4 and we'll do a 7-game series from the number 1 and versus number 4 and number 2 versus number 3, and then, have a championship based off of who wins those series. So that should be fun. The teams, so this randomization was nice because it gave me 5 AL and 5 NL teams, which, in theory it should, in practice it might not. If you do a randomization, you could get 6 and 4 or even 7 and 3. Aren't that uncommon. But we got 5 and 5. We got both Chicago clubs, the Cubs and the White Sox. We got the Colorado Rockies, the Detroit Tigers, the Kansas City Royals, the Los Angeles Dodgers, the Milwaukee Brewers, Minnesota Twins, St. Louis Cardinals, and Texas Rangers. So I think there's a pretty good array of good. You have the best record in baseball from last year, St. Louis. You have the World Series champions in Kansas City. You also have some teams that are going to be more of doormats, Minnesota and maybe Colorado. You can probably throw Milwaukee in there too. So there should be an interesting array, and it'll be interesting to see when you play them off in a season, who ends up being the actual bottom and which 4 actually rise to the top. And then from that point, you can, you'll end up see if Kansas City actually does in a short, I won't say a short series. It's 7 games isn't a short series, but they seem to do particularly well last year in a knockout playoff kind of situation, and maybe that'll repeat itself. Because we have teams from both leagues, I wanted to choose one paradigm as far as whether the pitchers hit or not, and we're going to go with no this time. Just because, I don't know, I guess at the time I thought, well, you're using sort of generic pitcher cards that sort of translate between guys. It's not like the guys actually, it's not like the pitcher when he's up to hit is going to actually use his actual stats to mean much. I mean, it's close, but so I guess I just decided that a DH would, limit some of the, batting choices and things like that, which I don't know. I mean, now that I think back on it, there's definitely some intrigue in when you, whether you leave a pitcher in or not, or whether you, use a pinch hitter, things like that. You intentionally walk a guy to get to the pitcher. I mean, there's reasons why I tend to like the no DH rule in the National League. And so maybe I sold myself short by not doing that, but I guess I had my reasons, and in effect it's making it a little bit simpler, although the National League teams, it's tougher to manage the at-bat choices or the at-bat situations for those teams, because the AL teams play with a DH almost all the time, and the NL teams play with the DH almost none of the time. So we'll see how that works out. Like I said before, I'm going to be using some judgment to try and make sure that the player that a National League team would use as a DH in normal situations is going to be used as a DH. It's not going to be just Mr. Small Sample Size that will get me the best stats. So, and honestly, it's I'm the commissioner of this league, so I'm the one playing all the teams. People are welcome to comment on particular videos if I put a video up of a game and I made a bad decision. I mean, that's it's good criticism. Maybe I'll end up learning from it because of that. I feel like I have a pretty good knowledge after watching baseball for the last 30 some odd years of my life, not to give away my age too much, but I mean, I've had lulls from the game, but at the moment, it is what it is. Like I said, I haven't played Strat for too much, but it's a learning process. So the last couple minutes here, I just like to talk more about what this channel will be about. Probably be some talk, about the game itself. Maybe I'll do some things that are sort of like tutorials, which, myself being relatively new to this, I might not be the most qualified to present, but I don't know. It hasn't stopped me before in other endeavors. So that being said, I'd also like to do some games. Actually roll off some games. I've seen a couple of different gentlemen do that on whether it's YouTube or some other platforms. And I mean, I do find, even I've had those games on maybe at the gym when I'm running, and a lot of people wouldn't find them necessarily interesting. If you're not into baseball, or you're not into statistics or things like that, or old-time players, you might not find it so interesting. I do if I have it on, like I said, at the gym, or maybe even in the car. It's something you can listen to. There's not much of a visual element to it. So even doing the videos, I mean, the videos are nice because you can have someone check your work. You can't just go and say, oh, I got a 2-3, and that just happens to be the home run for the team that I like, or whatever. Or it's just there's a level of accountability that you do for yourself. But I wouldn't do that for every game either. It's just, like I said, there's 270. It's a lot, and I'm already in my 6th game day, so to speak. So I'm 20 some odd games into this 270, about 10%. So I may pick some highlights. I had one play last night that was Kershaw versus Quintana, and I probably would have recorded that one if I had gotten this introduction up earlier, but because I think people would have liked seeing that, just to give a little bit of info. I think Kershaw had 11 strikeouts and a 2-hit complete game shutout. So the dude is good, but facing a Chicago team that seems to have a propensity to strike out is helpful too. So, but anyway, I'm going on here. This is a longer video. I just thought I would, if anybody watches this and wants to comment, you think they might find this interesting to watch, have some ideas on things I could do to improve the league setup I've put in there. I've developed spreadsheets to compile the statistics, which is something that I'm interested in. It's also helped me to come up with a randomized schedule to do these games in a random fashion, which is something that I really liked the idea of doing. And that's another thing I'm going to put on this channel over time, is probably some discussion of the statistics, some of the things that I've, the standings and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, I guess I've talked enough about this. Again, I'm Earl. Appreciate you watching this, and comment on any ideas or ways that you think I could make this even better. So till then, strat on.